Okay, so thank you for joining us, everyone, this evening. Lovely warm day in January 2023. We're here to talk to or to listen to Advocate Idan Seger, who's going to be telling us about or explaining to us the current situation, political situation here in Israel. Before we do an introduction, again, this event is being organised by LGBT Olim. We're a grassroots organisation run by LGBTQ plus Olim for LGBTQ plus Olim. We run events in English for people that have moved to Israel, and we also run Ivrit classes called Kulpan. So if you want any more information about LGBT Olim, please get in touch, and I can send you some information. But obviously, we're here to talk to Idan. So Idan is a lawyer. He's had his own law firm for the last year. Prior to that, he worked with Boaz Ben Sur, if I get his name correctly.
Right.
And get his name right. And prior to that, he did an internship with the Supreme Court. So he's here to explain in layman's terms, hopefully, what's going on here, why 150,000 people were on the streets across Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Modi'in, Haifa, elsewhere, last Saturday night and on previous weeks as well. Basically trying to explain to us, are people being hysterical, or do we actually have something to worry about? All right, so I'm going to pass over to Idan. Please, if you wouldn't mind saving any questions that you have to the end, and we'll deal with those once Idan has done his bit. All right. So thanks very much, Idan. If you'd like to take over, thanks a lot.
Okay. So thank you, Roy. And definitely we have something to worry about, great things to worry about for your question. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll start. Yes. Okay. So nice to meet you all. I'm Advocate Idan Seger. I did my internship a few years ago in the Supreme Court here in Israel and the State Attorney's Office in the HCJ department, which is the High Court of Justice department. I own, as Roy said, a law firm for public, civil, and criminal litigation. And I just published this November a fiction book, actually, not a law book, not a textbook, about Israel in its 120 year, which is by then a theocracy, the Kingdom of Judea. It came out in a very particular and odd timing. It's in Hebrew now, but it might be translated later on. So now we're going to just delve into the presentation, and as Roy said, I will kindly try to answer all the questions in the end, but I want to go through all of it in order to give you the full prism of things here. So our webinar goals will be to understand the unique constitutional structure of the State of Israel. It is not the same as in the US or other places, as you may know. We want to understand the details of the plan to change Israel's regime and to weaken the judiciary, the current plan of the coalition. And we would also want to understand the dangers that the plan poses to the protection of human and civil rights here in Israel. And all of that is for you to have a base of knowledge for the continuing fight against the plan, because I don't know which of you here in Israel or elsewhere in the world, but it's very important for people here and in other places around the world to make some noise and talk about this, because very dramatic changes are about to happen in the near future, and it's every one of us responsibility, everyone who cares about the democracy in Israel to speak out and try to stop things from happening. So let's talk about a classic constitution. Let's start from the basic. So a classic constitution will define the democratic game rules. It will establish the form of the regime, the governing authorities, their mutual relations. In Israel, we have the Knesset and the government. The government is controlling the Knesset. We have the judiciary. The constitution will also express the principles and values on which the state is founded on. And it will define the specific protected human and civil rights and the way in which they can be violated by the state. Because we know that human and civil rights are being violated by the state all the time. Our property right is being violated by taxes. Our liberties or people liberties are being violated by incarceration in case they are in a criminal, they're being charged in criminal offenses. So the state is hurting and violating rights, but it has to do it in a reasonable way and in a proportionate way. Some basic characteristics of a constitution are broad public consensus, right? We need to have a broader consensus than a slight win in an election. And the constitution is something which is supreme. It has supremacy. It is above a regular law. It is above a decision that a government makes. And it also rigid. It is something that is hard to change. This characteristic is derives from the public consensus, the broad public consensus that is needed in order to make the constitution at first. So it just makes sense that if we want to change it in the end, we need to have a majority or a very hard process to go through in order to change it. So these are the classic constitution features. And let's now talk about the Israeli constitution and how it is different from others. So a very short history lesson. There was the November 29th Kaftet November decision of the United Nations and the Declaration of Independence in the beginning of Israel, of the Israeli state. Both held that Israel should have a constitution. And then a constitutional committee established by the Provisional State Council decided that there is no obligation to establish a constitution. There are some main arguments for the supporters and the opponents. We won't get into it, but all of this led to what is called the Harari Compromise. This is MK Izar Harari, and in 1950, his proposals that was approved said that the constitution will be structured chapter by chapter in such a way that each of the chapters will constitute a basic law in itself. And all the chapters, meaning all the basic laws, together will be incorporated into the state constitution. So this has led us throughout the years to a few basic laws that we have here in Israel. The way of enacting a basic law is similar to the way the Knesset here in Israel operate enacting a regular law. We will talk about this more later, but just see the structure of basic law that we have here. Of course, we have a basic law that deals with the Knesset, a basic law that deals with the president of the state, the government, and also with the judiciary. This is the one that is marked in red. This is the one that the current coalition wants to change dramatically. And we also have, from the early 90s, two basic laws that deals with rights, with human rights. Our own Bill of Rights is a short Bill of Rights. It's not. It doesn't even say anything about equality or freedom of speech or freedom from religion, but it is something. And both basic laws, the human dignity and liberty, which is more famous, and the basic law that deals with freedom of occupation, contains a limitation clause. This is a clause that says that no violation of rights under the basic law will happen, except by a law befitting the values of the state of Israel, enacted for a proper purpose, and to an extent no greater than is required. This is the proportionality test. This limitation clause, which is different from the override clause that we're gonna talk about later, says something very, very basic, very simple. The Knesset, when it is enacting a regular law, should not hurt the rights, the protected rights in those basic laws, in a way that is not proportionate, in a way that is not fitting the values of the state of Israel, in a way that is not for a proper purpose. And this two basic clause and the limitation clause in them led to what is called the constitutional revolution. The years, the almost 30 years in which our Supreme Court started to strike down laws that were violating the limitation clause, that hurt rights in a way that's not fitting the limitation clause. And there were not a lot of laws that are being struck down by this. Only 21 laws, or even most of them, there was particular articles inside the laws, particular clauses inside the laws. In comparison to the US and other democracies that have a judicial review, this is a low number, a very, very low number. So as I said, our basic laws are supreme. They are above the regular laws of the Knesset, but their content is not rigid at all. They have been changed dozens of times throughout the years. For the purpose of changing them, a majority of 61 MKs, members of the Knesset, which is a regular coalition here, would suffice. And sometimes even a random majority would suffice, even less than 61 MKs. Here, there's a lot of words in Hebrew. I don't know if any of you can read Hebrew, but it states something very odd. In Israel, we had in the past 5 years, 20 amendments of basic laws. And if we compare it to the US had 27 amendments in the US Constitution from 1789. French had 15 amendments in its constitution from 1953. So we see that we change our constitution, our basic laws, very often, because it's very easy to do. And this presentation shows it. Most liberal democracies have a constitution that has a special and rigid amendment procedure. And Israel has its basic laws that are being amended in a regular procedure like regular laws. And of course, basic laws and constitution in most liberal democracies are above the regular laws. Let's talk about the separation of powers in Israel. So on paper, we have 3 authorities. We have the legislative branch, which is the Knesset. We have the operative branch, which is the government, and we have the judiciary. But in practice, the government that derives from the Knesset controls the Knesset because it has an automatic majority of 61 MKs at least. This current coalition have 64. So we have basically 2 different branches, the government that controls the Knesset and the judiciary. We also don't have a lot of other checks and balances that other Western liberal democracies have. We don't have a legislative authority that is split between 2 houses, like in the US or in Britain. We don't have regional election. We don't have a federalism state. We don't have a vertical separation of powers. We don't have a president which is elected independently by the public. And we don't have subordination to any regional international organizations like the European Union, or to supranational courts like the European Court of Human Rights. So as I said, Israel does not have any of these mechanisms. Our only strong checks and balances mechanism is our independent judiciary. Something wrong? Okay. The importance of an independent judiciary. The judiciary, unlike the government and the Knesset, is anti-majoritarian. And it has to be this way, so it can not reflect the mood and will of the majority at any given moment, prevent the tyranny of the majority, and protect minorities. It seems almost obvious. And now we're going to delve into the plan to weaken the judiciary. I explained the very easy way to change the Israeli constitution that is defined by basic laws. And I understand the importance of an independent judiciary because it's the only branch that is separating the power or can interfere with the power of the government that controls the Knesset. So now we're going to talk about the plan to weaken the judiciary by this current coalition. So here are in dots what the plan contains. It has many other issues that are now being prepared, but we're going to talk about what's being published by now. So first will be appointment, promotion, and dismissal of judges. They're going to change. They want to change the way things done. Prohibiting the court from striking down basic laws. Supermajority to strike down laws by the court, and a narrow override clause by the Knesset, cancellation of the reasonableness standard, and legal advisors to the government will be political nominations. So I went over everything very fast. We're going to delve into details now. So appointment, promotion, and dismissal of judges. Let's talk about the Judicial Selection Committee today. In Israel, in order to appoint judges and justices to the Supreme Court, we have a Judicial Selection Committee that today contains two representatives of the government. One of them is the Minister of Justice, two MKs, two members of the Knesset. We have three Supreme Court justices, the Chief Justice and the two others that is beneath him. And we have the two representative of the Israel Bar Association. The current composition of the Judicial Selection Committee, in order to appoint justices, has to come into some kind of compromise, because you need 7 out of those 9 members to approve a nomination to the Supreme Court. So what happens practically is that the politicians on one hand and the justices and the professionals, the lawyers, getting to deals. So they appoint one nomination which is more politically supported, and one that is more professional or supported by the justices. It is also worth noting that in the Knesset part of this committee today, we have long years of a tradition that one of them is from the opposition and one of them is from the coalition. It has changed in the past few years, but it has been this way for decades. I don't know how to stop this translation. I don't know if it bothers anyone. Kind of bothering me, but we'll get on. So no authority, as I said, can appoint justices without the consent of the other authorities. In order to appoint a judge to the other courts, not the Supreme Court, you need only 5. So it's easier, but in order to get to the Supreme Court, you need 7. And this is the Judicial Selection Committee as proposed in the plan. So they want to make it a larger committee, which is composed by 11 and not 9 members. The government will have another more member. The Knesset will have another more member, but they're gonna specifically say that 2 members of the Knesset will be from the coalition and 1 from the opposition. The Supreme Court justices will remain the same, and there will be, instead of the representative of the Israel Bar Association, 2 public representatives appointed by the Minister of Justice. So if we look at it very carefully, we see that we have 7 out of 11 members that are controlled by the coalition, and that the coalition appointed. And in order to appoint, you need only 6 because you also want to annul the supermajority that is now needed in order to appoint a justice to the Supreme Court. So the meaning, as the headline says, it's a complete politicization of the judicial system. The coalition will basically take over of the election of all judges, their promotion and the dismissal, because I did not say it before, but the committee also controls dismissal of judges and justices in certain cases. And of course, it is promoting judges throughout the bench. And also, they're going to open a new possibility of parachuting a president to the Supreme Court. In Israel, we have the seniority system, which means that the older, the justice that has longer years at the bench will become Chief Justice when the current Chief Justice is retiring. It is a very smooth and apolitical way of appointing a Chief Justice, but the current coalition want to change that as well, and to make the committee choose every 6 years or 7 years a new president of the Supreme Court, a new Chief Justice. And this will of course make things even more political and make the justices even more want to be likable by the politician that controls their appointments. So the meanings of this change will be that all appointed judges will hold political connections. More appointed judges will hold political connections. Judges will have a uniform, this is even more hard, judges will have a uniform ideological tone, and there will be a persistent grip of politicians on judges throughout promotion, dismissal procedures. This will lead eventually to crushing the professionalism of the judiciary and the public trust in judges. And it's very easy to imagine how one political figure will feel coming to the court knowing that the justice or the judge that sits in front of him is a political appointment of a certain party. We're going now to another part of the plan, which is prohibiting the court from striking down basic laws. So the Supreme Court has not struck down a basic law by now. It said in the past few years that it might do it, but it did not happen till now. But if this plan will come through, then he will not be able to annul a law defined by the Knesset as a basic law. And this is a very, very hard step, because I mentioned earlier that enacting a basic law it's easy as making a regular law, as enacting a regular law. So coalition MKs will be able to enact any law as a basic law, and therefore make it immune from judicial review, even when the law's content does not fit into a constitution. It's very specific. Let's say a basic law about the elections to the 26th Knesset, which will be our next elections, or a basic law that says something about the state of Israel as a halakha state, which will hurt the democratic part of the Israeli state, or a basic law that talks about reconciliation among the people and prevent people from protest or saying things that are not likable by the coalition. So by now we have this weapon of the Supreme Court striking down basic law, which is dramatically hurting the democratic or the Jewish part of the Israeli state. This coalition wants to prevent the Supreme Court from striking down basic laws. But on the other hand, this coalition does not constrain the Knesset from enacting basic laws. Let's say deciding that a basic law will be enacted only by a supermajority of 80 or not even 90 member of the Knesset, or will be in action only after one more elections, or anything at the sort. So they're giving themselves an enormous amount of power to change the whole Israeli constitution without the Supreme Court being able to say anything about it. This is one of the most dramatic steps that I see in the plan. we're heading to a supermajority to strike down laws due to violation of fundamental rights. So, as I said earlier, in the current situation, we have basic laws that deals with human rights and dignity and the freedom of occupation. And when there is a regular law that is not proportionate and hurting those rights, the Supreme Court is striking it down. The Supreme Court did not use this very lightly, and it did it for very few times throughout the years. But this plan will say that the Supreme Court will be able to invalidate laws for contradicting basic laws only in full panel, which means 15 justices, and by a majority of 80% of the panel's members. It bothered me to see the number 80% and not in real number, because it's a very easy math. We have 15 justices today at the bench, so it's 12 out of 15. But it made me think that the next steps will be to do a court packing, to nominate more justices to the Supreme Court. Let's say making it a 20 justices court. And then 80% will be even a harder goal to achieve, to strike down a law. So the chance that the court will strike down legislation due to violation of fundamental rights is zero, or approximately zero. And mainly considering the government's control over the appointment of judges and justices. You would say, well, okay, but they can strike the law at least. But then we're getting into a very narrow override clause that this plan is going to give the Knesset. The Knesset will be able to reenact a law with a majority of 61 MKs, even after the High Court of Justice, our Supreme Court, invalidate the law due to a serious violation of fundamental rights. Meaning, even if 80% of a full panel of the Supreme Court will strike down a law, a regular majority of the coalition in the Knesset can reenact it the same, do a copy-paste of the law. It doesn't even need to change anything inside the content of the law, just to state that they want it to be enacted, even though the Supreme Court strike it down. So this means absolute power for the coalition to violate human and civil rights legislation. For example, separation, it can be used for separation between men and women in public spaces, for discrimination in providing services to different populations, for harming minorities like LGBTs, Arabs, refugees. It's a potentially serious violation of rights, and it is, I believe, shown. Another part of the plan is the cancellation of the reasonableness standard. This is not something that deals with legislation. It's about the government operations. Today, when the government decide to do something, a simple citizen can go and file a petition against a decision and say that the decision is unreasonable, extremely unreasonable, and the court will probably strike it down. I will give a simple example. I want to get a license for my business. The authority does not give me the license, even though I stand with all the criteria to get a license. And then I go to the court and I said, this is a very unreasonable decision and it need to be struck down, and I should be given a license. So today the court can help me, but tomorrow if the plan will went out, then it won't be able to help me. There will be still some kind of other ways to deal with the hard decision making by authorities and the government. But our arbitrariness will receive immunity. You will be need to prove a conflict of interest in the decision, or extraneous motives, or improper procedure, something that is much harder to show in a lot of decisions that are being held by the executive branch. So we have here a situation in which no limitations on the executive branch discretion will be, even in cases of extremely unreasonable decisions. It will remove limitations that currently exist on the decision of the executive authority, and this will also can hurt a lot of human rights. Legal advisors will become yes men. This is another part, because we might think, well, we have this very hard plan against our judiciary. Maybe some good legal advisors will prevent any harm to begin with in the government. So the current coalition wants to change that as well and make the legal advisors to the government ministries to be defined as positions of trust. So the minister will be able to ignore their opinions and fire them, and all the background of knowledge that is being kept throughout the years will be tossed out in order to appoint a political nomination. This will lead to political interests that will prevail over the public good and over what the law really mean. This will seriously undermining the rule of law, and this can be defined as disabling the essential gatekeepers here that are currently keeping the government to operate according to law. So if we're talking about all of those changes that we talked, and there are more to come, the result will be unlimited power to the executive branch and an immediate danger of tyranny of the majority. I finished now. If anyone has questions about anything that I said, this is now the time to ask. I'm wondering, Roy, how would we do it?
That's a good question. I think what we'll do is ask people to raise their hands, and we'll just unmute people one at a time. Otherwise, it could get a little bit chaotic.
Okay.
All right. So, can you? Are you sharing still? Can you stop sharing the screen?
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for that. First of all, hold on a second. There's my thing on. Okay. So first of all, we have Natalie.
Hi. I'm just really curious, like, what someone who was, because I obviously am only like consuming media from like my perspective, so I'm really curious, and it like is very obviously to me like bad. So, but obviously like not everyone feels that way. So I'm really curious, like how people who are for this are like justifying it.
Okay. Very good question. Well, they say, as people say in many populist regimes, that the judiciary is being controlled by the elites, and the judiciary is the only place in which the elite still rules, and therefore the elite is against toppling down the authorities that are being given now to the judiciary. But the resistance to this plan is across the border. It goes from right to left, but unfortunately, the debate and the understanding, the deep understanding of what those steps means, is it's all been discussed now after the elections, and the majority that the current coalition enjoys in the Knesset is something that you cannot ignore. They have it, and they can technically operate in order to enact those changes to the judiciary basic law. That's a problem. Anyone else?
Hi, Max. Yes, hello.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a few questions.
Sure.
Question like the rule of reasonableness. Can you explain maybe a little more about what that is? And I've heard the name Aaron Barak a lot. Can you maybe put some context to his role in changes in the judiciary? And then, kind of to what extent is Aryeh Deri's disqualification a flashpoint for this, or is that completely something else entirely? And yeah, I think those are my questions.
All right. So I will start with Aryeh Deri. Aryeh Deri's appointment was nullified by the Supreme Court by a panel of 11 justices. It happened last week. And the main reason for striking down this appointment was the fact that Aryeh Deri was being convicted in 3 different trials throughout the years, and is now about to be appointed in 2 years from now to ministry, to the Treasury. So most of the justices said that this is an unreasonable act by our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. But there was another group inside the justices panel that said that Aryeh Deri is prevented to begin with, not based on reasonableness of the appointment of what our Prime Minister decided, but on its own, Aryeh Deri is prevented from taking this job because he, when convicted in his last trial in 2022, less than a year ago, he said to the court that he's retiring from public offices. So they based striking down his appointment on this reason. And also worth noting, when we're talking about Aryeh Deri, that in the basic law that deals with the government, there's been a criteria that prevented Aryeh Deri to begin with to be a minister. And the current coalition, because it's so easy to change the basic law, to try to think about it as the Senate in the US changing the constitution after elections in order the constitution to fit a current political situation. It's this easy. So they changed this criteria in order to make him fit with the punishment that he's been given in February 22. And our Supreme Court said, well, this seems very bad, but because we don't want to interfere with the Knesset, with the work of the Knesset, when it is enacting regular laws and even more basic laws, we will try to decide this case on other merits. So the justices did not say anything harsh on this matter, but on its own, it's a very problematic use of the authority given to the Knesset to make our constitution in basic laws. And about Aaron Barak, well, Aaron Barak is being very dominant in the discussion about the judiciary and activism here in Israel for many decades. Aaron Barak sat on the bench in the beginning of the constitutional revolution in the early 90s. He is the face of the constitutional revolution. And obviously, he's being also portrayed as the demon when people are talking about changing, but actually destroying the system. They're talking about Aaron Barak because he led this constitutional revolution. But actually, thinking about it thoroughly, the Knesset enacted laws, basic laws that deals with rights that gave the Supreme Court the authority to strike down laws, regular laws that are not that are hurting rights in an unproportionate way. Aaron Barak just make it clear that this is what the Knesset did. I hope I answered all of your questions.
Excellent, thanks for that. Next we have Lev.
Hi, Lev. We don't hear you. You are muted.
Yes, here I am. Hello, everyone, and thank you for such a detailed and clear presentation. Really appreciated that. I might be asking a fairly basic question because I'm still quite new and sort of getting to grips with Israeli politics. But so I understand that 61 Knesset members can change laws, and I understand that when
Constitution, not just laws.
Okay. And when an MK sits in a coalition, they have to vote according to what that coalition, they have to vote en bloc, en masse.
Right.
Are there any, because in the UK, there are circumstances sometimes where they allow MPs to vote according to conscience and not en bloc. And I'm wondering, are there any circumstances in Israel where that is the case, or it's always, there's always this voting en bloc situation?
Well, of course, any member of the Knesset can vote on his own will, but mostly they're voting according to the coalition needs.
I mean, what I'm getting at, and there must be plenty of Likud MKs that don't agree with this. There must be plenty of MKs in the Knesset that don't agree with what's going on. How can they exercise their will?
So sadly, the current coalition has only the Likud in the liberal wing, and all the other parties are ultra-Orthodoxes or semi-ultra-Orthodoxes, I would say. And in the Likud, well, this party had changed a lot throughout the years because of Benjamin Netanyahu's trial. There's been a very quick shift, and also the things they say about the courts, the hatred that they are spreading around the judiciary, and the perception that a strong and independent judiciary is something important. It is almost unheard of, but in Israel, it is. It's our routine here for 3 or even 4 years. We are hearing more and more from very, very high hierarchy MKs in the Likud that the judiciary should be changed dramatically, should be controlled by the government, should talk like the government. So sadly, I don't see many MKs in the Likud standing against the Likud, meaning Benjamin Netanyahu's wants. But it might change, and that depends on international pressure and on inner pressure that is spreading out these days. Basically, they all can stand out and say, we want to vote differently, we don't want to vote for this. But the chances politically for this to happen are not so high, very low, actually.
Thanks for that, Lev. Next, we have Stephanie.
Hi, yeah, thank you also for this great presentation. It's been very helpful for me to kind of to really begin to understand below the surface of how all of these different, all the complexity in this. I have a couple of questions. One is, now you kind of, I think, touched on it a little bit just now, but what I was thinking was that, there's this general sense that there's this unicameral system, and the normal checks and balances. There's a recognition that there's really not a strong system there, and this is what these proposals, that they argue are to try to fix. And what I'm wondering is, we're saying that, yeah, here's all the problems with the proposals that they're making, but are there other alternative proposals that are really out there that offer another solution to these problems? That's my one question. Like, what are those other proposals, and what are the chances of, what are their avenues for success? And my other question is then just on the legal advisors. The one thing that comes to mind is, I think in the United States, where Congress people appoint their own legal advisors. There's no one else. They choose them themselves. And so there's something there I don't quite understand yet about why can't Knesset members choose their own legal advisors?
Government.
Oh,
Those were two very, very good and important questions. So let's start with this. As I showed, we have a very weak checks and balances system here. It's much more weaker than in the US because of the easy way to change our constitution, as it's being as they're trying to do now. And in this very weak system, the legal advisors are being some sort of an inner check and balances to the government. So it's kind of different than in the US, because in the US, I know when the government changes, whole legal advisors and staffs are being changed as well. Here you have some continuity with the legal advisors, and this is some sort of thing that will restrain. But I can go with that and say, well, if the legal advisors were the only thing in this plan that they want to change, I would say, okay, at least we have a strong judiciary and an independent one and not a political one that can deal with things that will happen with a wrong legal advisor, like with a legal advisor that says to the minister what he wants to hear. But they're going to topple down the judiciary anyway, so we're going to be left out without any real protection against the want of the majority, the will of the majority. And about other proposals, so there are many proposals that throughout the years went out and published. At this particular time, it seems that most of the people that are opposing this current plan are saying, well, you do not, and it's just a matter of speaking, you do not negotiate with terrorists, meaning if someone wants to topple down democracy, you do not come to the table and try to see how to change democracy in a bit. If you want to talk about how to make Israel a better democracy, then that's okay. People can sit down in a room with professionals and understand, based on a lot of parameters and a lot of data, what is the good changes that should be taken. I might say that a change that is being proposed for many years is to define in the basic law of the judiciary the majority needed to strike down a law by the justices, because now a simple majority can strike down a law, 3 justices, 2 against 1. It's not happening at all, because most of the time when the Supreme Court deals with an important constitutional petition, it enlarging the bench and making it a bench of 5, 7, or even 9 or 11 justices. But practically, it's something that needs to be organized in the basic law of judiciary, to state that in order to strike down the law, there's a need of 9 or 11 or even 13. But the way they propose it is like it is almost like they don't want the Supreme Court to strike down any law. There's another proposal by another MK of the coalition that says, well, not even 80%. All of the Supreme Court justices should strike down a law. So if you also choose the Supreme Court justices, then it's not going to happen. And there are many more proposals. One very important is to enact the basic law of legislation, which will state that in order to change a basic law or to enact a basic law, you need a majority that is larger than 61. The current coalition, it's being published in one of our newspapers here, is they want to enact a basic law of legislation, but they want to do it only after they change everything else. So they want to make it harder to change basic laws, but only after they change the basic laws in the way that suits the current coalition. Very hard.
Crazy, isn't it? Thank you for that. Next, we have Martine.
Hi, Dan. How you doing?
Good. Hello.
Good to have you here. 2 questions. Basically, okay, what it can be done in terms of measures or how to go in this fight? I mean, who will fight for this not to happen? And this is the first question. And the second question is if you, I mean, how it works. I mean, because we have around the world, we have many samples of how the judiciary system can fight against corrupt governments, which I think is the case in Israel. For just to give an example, Argentina, after the Nuremberg trials, the junta trials in 1985, basically went about all the crimes committed by the dictatorship, decades of dictatorships. And we're talking about a strong, very strong judiciary system that's been fighting against military dictatorships through decades, but also against the corrupt governments. So those two will be the questions.
Okay, so what can be done? Well, this Zoom is one thing that can be done, spreading the information, correct as much as I could with the language barrier to give you all. And as I said in the beginning of the presentation, I think it's very important that everyone that Israel democracy is important to him to talk about it with people, mainly with people that can impact the situation and that know people that can impact the situation, and to understand. The basic thing is for many people, as much as we can understand the severeness of the situation that we're into. The second thing is getting out on the streets, something that we see happening here in Israel for 3 consecutive weeks, and just to make things in the right context, Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice, he talked about this plan only 2.5 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. So it's something that happened very fast. High-tech companies here in Israel, many academics from the economy and law universities, all are talking against this very loudly, and of course there will be a lot of actions being held in courts when they're gonna get this through in the Knesset. I don't know how will the court operate, and eventually if the court will strike down this reform, I don't know how the coalition will react. We're heading into a very, very terrifying constitutional breakdown. I hope that Benjamin Netanyahu and other people at his surrounding will understand that it needs to be stopped one stage earlier. I might admit that I didn't actually understand the second part of the question, but sure, we need to maintain a strong and independent judiciary in order to deal with people that are treating political power in a dangerous way against people. If that what
the second part relates to because it's like nobody will invent the wheel every once in a while. The wheel has been invented already, and this what's going on here in Israel has happened already. It's happening all the time in other countries. So an example can be taken on how to go about. I know that some countries might not speak English or might speak different languages, but I believe there are many cases out there in which the higher courts are being in danger by corrupt governments, and they fight back. Not only, not just them, but obviously the political parties that are, the opposites of the government. They fight all together. People fight together. I'm not into any political party myself here in Israel, but I know that this type of things have been going on historically, but in recent years, have many cases. I gave you the example of Argentina.
Yeah.
The higher court has been all the time, every single year, endangered. And the government wants to politicize the higher courts. Obviously, they say no. You won't get that far. We'll just ban any law that you want to change. We'll just ban it. We won't let you go through the Constitution.
So I hope that this same thing will happen here. We have Chief Justice Esther Chayut that spoke that criticized very hardly the reform almost 2 weeks ago. And it seems like when it will get into the court will try to interfere. But as I said, in the end, it's about who controls the facilities, who controls the army, who controls the police. It goes through those places. So I hope that before we'll get into this question of who controls what kind of a facility and what kind of operation, our politicians will understand that they crossed the line. And we are learning from the case of Hungary and Poland. Those are more similar cases, especially the one in Hungary. Politicians here from the Likud are in deep connections with the Fidesz party of Viktor Orban. And also there's a forum comes from the US here called Kohelet that has strong connections with Hungarian academic companies, forums.
Excellent.
Thank
Thank you
you.
much for that. We have a question from Berkowitz.
Hey, you're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
How about now?
Now you're
Excellent.
okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. And thanks, Roy, for organizing this thing. I'm calling you from France. And I have
Lucky
I have seriously been thinking of making Aliyah since I lost both of my parents last year, but it's been something that's been in my mind. And being part of the gay community here, and we have legal marriage and everything, I'm listening to everything that you've presented, and I'm reading all the things that goes up on WhatsApp, and I'm wondering how badly is this going to affect the LGBT movement here in Israel? I mean, as far as the freedom of being gay, I've had the pleasure and of walking the streets in Tel Aviv on the boardwalk years ago, and holding a man's hand, and being a Jew and being able to do that in Tel Aviv was such a deep, comforting feeling that I've never felt before, you know. And I was wondering, and I've been wondering, how is this going to affect this whole society in Tel Aviv, and not in Tel Aviv, in Israel as a whole? I mean, I'm going to Israel to see my family for Pesach, and then I'm going back for June because I want to be there for Pride, and I want to be there and demonstrate and be part of, you know, a support group. But I'm not going to say I'm having second feelings about this, but I can't hide the fact that I don't want to be moving into a country that's going to start oppressing people with penalizing and punishment. I mean, what is your feeling about that? And that is my whole question.
Very important question. First of all, I'm sorry for your loss. I would say this. In Israel, because of the political deadlock between the right and the left wing, the ultra-Orthodox throughout the years, I'm talking about decades, held a very key component of each coalition, and therefore gaining gay rights here in Israel and any advance in equality for gays happened by the courts from the 90s and even earlier until now. My spouse has his own law firm. He's also a lawyer, bad for us. And they filed a petition 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, about the discrimination in the surrogacy law here in Israel. And the Supreme Court intervened after 10 years, after letting the Knesset change it by its own, but the Knesset did not change it because the ultra-Orthodox controlled the coalition in a way. And then the Supreme Court interfered and struck down the discrimination in the surrogacy law, and it did so in many other cases, and gave us rights. So sadly, if you're undermining the Supreme Court ability to strike down discriminative laws and actions against parades, let's say there'd been a gay parade in the southern city here in Israel, that the police wanted to change dramatically and make it irrelevant, because they wanted to make it very short in a very narrow place in the city. So then again, a petition was filed against the police, against this one, and the Supreme Court interfered and changed it. And by the way, the police explained the change of the course of the gay parade by saying that there is a fear that ultra-Orthodox and even just religious people will hurt the gays and the other people that walk in this route. But the Supreme Court did not approve of that. They say, well, you need to make sure that they're being safe. They have the right to the freedom of speech, and then the right to hold a parade and go throughout the city. And hate is not an excuse to put them in a cage, metaphorically in a cage in a very small portion of the city. So if I'm trying to close down the question, because it's a very broad question, if you're given the government and the coalition the sole power to decide about discriminatory laws and government actions, then it's fearsome to the gay community. It's fearsome to women, it's fearsome to Arabs, and also to gays. This can hurt dramatically the gay community here, even though the current coalition and mostly Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu constantly say they're not about to hurt the LGBTQ community, and they want the gay community to thrive. Once again, they're saying it now because it's benefit them in the field of voters, because you have a strong sense here in Israel of strong support of 70 or even 80% of the people that support gay rights and support gay equality. But when it will change, and when they will need the ultra-Orthodox keep needing them to keep gain power, then they might give out rights of gay people and hurt gay people in many different ways.
Well,
sorry to put this through like this.
Okay, one of the reasons I said that, because a few years ago there was a book that was put out here in France called the Gay Mirage. I don't know if you've heard about it. It was all about the government trying to promote, if you will, propaganda, and promote how liberal and how acceptant the government was as far as the gay community was concerned. And that's why so many gay people from all over the world started going to Israel and bring all that money in. And actually, it was just to show people around the world that, you see, we're more open-minded than you see. And I'm wondering today, is that true or not? I mean, it doesn't seem so.
Well, it's called pinkwashing. It happens for years here. It is correct to say that gay people that lives in Tel Aviv enjoy life generally. We have many places to go to, bars and parties, and people live here with families, raising kids. I have 2 kids, 2 years old, twins. We enjoy life here for now, but it is frightening to know that if this plan will go through the Knesset, we won't have any protection, any real protection of the courts here, and will be in the hands of 61 MKs that can be changed in a few years and be more religious. And even now, they don't have a very religious and liberal, non-religious and liberal vibes. So I guess in June you probably enjoy the pride here, but we're fearing what will happen in 2 or 3 or 4 years with this reform, because it changes dramatically the separation of power here. It basically say that one branch, the executive branch, controls the legislative branch. It already controls it, and now it's going to control also de facto the judiciary. So things are going to be bad if we're depending on 61 MKs to deal with our rights. They did not prove to do it well till now.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Just one last question, if I may, myself. How
Yeah, sure.
strong or weak do you see the current coalition? Obviously, Netanyahu is beating his drums and beating his chest and saying this is going to go the full distance. But they're already cracks showing. There have been arguments over the last couple of weeks about a Jewish settlement in the West Bank being demolished, and Ben Gvir being very angry about that, and Smotrich's party, his party, boycotting meetings already. So is this coalition going to last? Or is all of this going to be moot if there's another election in 2023-24?
So that's the $1 million question. I'm not optimistic about them cracking down from themselves. I feel that they have a lot of inner problems, and they're stepping on each other's toes. And Benjamin Netanyahu is weak against them, but still they have a very strong glue that brings them together, and they have a chance to gain an enormous amount of power. So it will be silly for them to not seek this through. But things can surprise us. I'm not optimistic about them falling down before changing anything. But of course, it's all of us hope. We talk about it a lot. I actually interrogated Benjamin Netanyahu in the court 2 days ago. He seemed tired, but still talked vividly. So as long as he's pushing through, we're in problem.
Yes. Okay. Right. One last question, Rivka, and then I think we'll need to wrap up. Okay. Hi, Rivka.
Hi. Thank you for this Zoom, and this explanation was very clear. Question, and I'm not very hopeful, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In the event that this goes through, or most of it goes through with some changes, do you see that it could be fixed, the damage could be resolved the next time with the next government that comes up? So if we get a moderate middle left, the next election, would they be able to just change all of this back?
Okay, so I'll try to make a short answer, because I know Roy wants us to finish, but it's a very important question, and I have a lot of things to say about it. So first, as I said, their plan is to change the way basic laws are being enacted and make it harder to change basic laws after they're changing a huge part of our basic laws. This is unfair, but they want to do it. So if they will succeed, it will be very hard for the next coalition, even assuming it will be a centered coalition, to do that. And also, even if they don't, I believe that politicians, even from the left and center part of of the political life have the tendency not to give out power that is being given them by the constitution. So if a center-left coalition will arrive, they will say, well, okay, it is an enormous power, but we're going to deal with it in a very humanitarian and good way. So there's no need to change it. Yair Lapid, the leader of the opposition, said we're going to change everything when we'll be back in power. But realistically, I don't think they will change everything because, as I said, politicians love power. And one last thing, given the power that they're taking in their hands now, while changing this, there might not even be next elections as we see elections being held here in Israel democratically in the past years, because they can enact basic laws that are dealing with the elections in many ways and changing things. We saw just yesterday, it's being published that one of the Likud MKs offered to change the way the committee of the election can strike down parties, Arab parties, that are supporting terrorism. They're going to make the definition more broad, so a lot of Arabs will not be able to run to the Knesset to begin with. And this is just one change that we're seeing now before they're making the plan go through. So it's even hard to say if there will be a change of power in the coming few years. Sorry that I'm not optimistic, guys. I'm trying to give you the most realistic answers that I see.
Then you think that they will be able to restrict who can have the ability for the government to change the makeup of the Knesset, of the coalition and the opposition?
They can enact any basic law that they want, and the Supreme Court cannot deal with it, cannot interfere with it. So I assume there will be a very hard misuse of that authority. And also they can enact regular laws that the Supreme Court most likely won't be able to strike down because they're nominating justices and making it very hard to strike down a law. So I guess they will make the next election look very not like the elections we tend to know here in Israel, and make life of the opposition very hard.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Idan. I really appreciate you taking out of your free time. And thank you everyone for joining us as well. It's great to see so many people here, and it's great to know so many people care. Just one final word. If you want to join us, if you want to march, there are going to be more protests this Saturday night, and I'm sure for Saturday nights to come. So if you're worried about being on your own, LGBT Olim will be there. So if you want to join us, you're more than welcome to. And we'll keep up the fight. So please, Idan, keep us posted and let us know what we can do.
Okay.
And yeah. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Final words.
By the way, it might be a good chance to say, my law firm and my spouse law firm that is specializing in constitutional law, we're planning to file a petition against the plan once it is go through the Knesset. And if any of you want to contribute to this petition, to be one of the petitioners, there are going to be a lot of petitioners, or to donate any amount of money that can help us to sustain this practice, you're more than welcome to contact me. You can talk with Roy.
Can I ask Roy to connect us? I'm a licensed attorney here in Israel, in addition to being a licensed attorney in the United States. And I would love to help if it's in any way possible. So can we maybe we can talk and see if there's anything I can do to help.
Sure. We'll be happy to any help. It's a huge case that we're going to argue in front of the Supreme Court, and
wonderful.
Any help will be highly appreciated.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Roy, and thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank
nice
you very
evening.
much, everyone.
Thank
Okay, and if
you.
you want any
Yeah.
more information,
Very
please get in
much.
touch with me. And if you want to come along to our events, please have a look at lgbtlm.org and also our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/lgbtlm. Okay, thank you very much,
Thank
everyone,
you.
and hope to see you all
Thank
soon.
you.
Thanks for
Thank you.
organizing,
Bye.
Roy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.